Hi everyone, my name's Meghan Warren. I'm a director here at Burke and Associates Lawyers. I'm also a director on the executive of the Law Institute of Victoria, which is the peak body for Victorian lawyers. I'm here today with Tony Burke, who is my colleague and former boss.
Yes, not anymore.
No, not anymore, now my employee. Tony's going to be talking about the use of outsourcing in law firms. Tony was one of the early adopters of outsourcing in Victoria in the 8 or so years that our firm's been using outsourcing. So it's become really an intrinsic part of our firm's infrastructure.
It has. So
Tony, let's begin by first asking why you moved to outsourcing in the first place.
Well, Meghan, at the risk of stating some truisms, the practice of law is a very labour-intensive undertaking, and I think the general rule of thumb around the profession is that about 50% of business overheads are attributable to labour costs. The balance goes to things that are relatively fixed expenses, things like rent, computer equipment, insurance and that sort of thing, which don't vary too much according to the efficiency of the practice. So it follows that if you want to achieve some degree of profitability in your legal practice, you need to focus on the way in which you manage people. So that was the focus of it.
Yeah. Great. And what refined your learning about law firm economics, Tony?
Well, I think, Meghan, you and I have got a similar sort of career trajectory.
Yeah.
We've both been involved in the running of law firms for quite a few years. In my case, getting close to 40 years. I think in your case, is it 10 years or so?
I think it's about 10, yeah.
About 10 years?
Yeah.
So I've learnt in the trenches, doing that day to day. And I've also had the benefit, like you, I see the certificate on the wall, of having done the Company Directors course at the Australian Institute of Company Directors, which I found to be enormously helpful in the running of a practice. So the formal study combined with the in the trenches study has served to found me and you and give us that understanding about what it is that makes for a successful law firm.
Great, good. Well, that's all very well at the high level, Tony, but let's get a bit more specific about what you've done.
Okay, I think it's going on 8 years now. I was encouraged by a legal practice management consultant who I'd had dealings with for many years to have a look at the idea of outsourcing some of our work to a legal outsourcing outfit based in Calcutta in India. And I took up that initiative and came to learn of a company called Strategic Business Alliance, or otherwise known as SBA. And I made my inquiries. I met with the director, Partha Nag, and learned quite a lot about the business. And what was most significant to me in those early days was that SBA was a company incorporated in Victoria, in Australia, had an office in Melbourne in Australia, but had a back room, if you like, in Calcutta in India. So that gave me a great deal of comfort that I was dealing with a local company, and the relationship between my firm and that firm was governed by the local law in which I felt comfortable and in which I practiced. So that was the gateway into SBA.
Great, great. So how does it all work?
Well, probably the best way of answering that question is to give you some examples of a workflow. Would it be of any interest if I talk about a probate thing, for example?
Yes.
Okay. Well, picture this. On the first encounter with a probate file, I would meet with either a widow or a widower or son or daughter or some aggregation of those people. and I would take instructions. And the process of taking instructions is one of taking notes, getting information, getting documents, explaining what it's all about. So after that initial encounter, I'd say goodbye to the clients, and then the real work starts. And with the advent of SBA, that would typically involve something like this. I would dictate a series of documents on digital dictation, which could then be emailed to SBA in India. And they would be things like instructions to open the file using our practice management software, which they have access to, instructions to type up a diary note of the meeting, which would come through the digital dictation, instructions to populate a database for some precedents and generate maybe half a dozen precedent documents, instructions to prepare form letters to financial institutions where the deceased may have bank accounts, and that sort of thing. Quite a lot of the initial work. So the sound file goes off over the internet. I go home, have a good night's sleep, come back to the office, and the following morning I open up my email, and here's the report on the work done by SBA overnight.
Great.
And I've got in my file confirmation that the file's been opened. I've got template documents to work from. I've got a series of pro forma letters, and I've broken the back of that work undertaking. And so it follows with the history of the file, letters, documents, and so on. And at the end of the transaction, we can even get SBA to prepare an account.
Thanks, Tony. And what about litigation, which is mostly where I practice?
Well, Megan, the process is conceptually similar. Thinking back to my litigation days, you would have a meeting with your client, you would take instructions, thank the client, say goodbye to the client, and then start the work. And the work, in this case, would be dictating a digital proof of evidence, dictating instructions about the opening of the file using our practice management software, perhaps dictating form documents, dictating letters to various people. And then that digital sound file goes through the internet to SBA in Calcutta. And then the following morning, most of those documents will be in your inbox and on your document management system. So then it's just a matter of tweaking them, making any amendments that are necessary, bearing in mind that they're going out in your name, so you need to be satisfied about them, printing them off and sending them. So maybe by 10 or 11 in the morning, the work is flying, and you've got to jump on most other practitioners.
Yeah, fantastic. And what about research?
Well, research has been really interesting. We've established that a significant number of the people who work for SBA in India are qualified lawyers. They have law degrees from universities and they are fluent in English. And so it's possible to get fairly basic level research done without too much drama. So, for example, I've had quite a number of occasions where I've met a new client for the first time and I've identified the general nature of the problem, but then it's getting late in the day and I haven't had time to research it myself. So I'll dictate a memo to SBA in India, and typically it'll be something like this. Don't spend more than an hour, but have a look at this issue in these two databases and send me a report in the morning. And if you find any cases that are relevant, send them to me as well. And then I've had the experience of coming in, opening up my email the first thing in the morning, and lo and behold, there's a 2 or 3 page compendium about the area of law, often involving things that I hadn't thought of, and with half a dozen cases in PDF form that have been extracted from the database.
Yeah, fantastic.
And I'm off and running.
Fantastic. Great.
It's good.
So How do you know that the people working in Calcutta are not being exploited?
That's interesting. That was a subject of much discussion before we started using the outsourcing facility in India. And I had a couple of employees who were particularly concerned about it. In fact, they were directors of the firm. And so I bit the bullet, and we sent them on trips to Calcutta, the two of them. And they were greeted like royalty when they got there, and spent a week working with the people in Calcutta. And there was a two-way street. They learnt what was happening in Calcutta, and they provided some training as well. And they came back with the report that the team in SBA in Calcutta were working in high quality offices with good quality equipment and with a level of security over their day-to-day operations that was far superior to what we had in our own office and what most law firms have in their office. And for example, they had rules that mobile phones had to be kept out of the building and so on. So they came back and we were off and running. They were very encouraged.
Fantastic. And so what is SBA doing for Burke and Associates nowadays?
Well, that's a difficult question to answer because there's so much. Probably the best way to answer it is, well, they're doing a lot of the back house stuff that goes to drive a legal practice. So digital dictation, word processing, precedent management, IT support, which has proved to be a very recent development, some work on some marketing material, designing digital books that we can use to promote ourselves, doing accounts, doing account verifications and reconciliations. There's a whole range of tasks.
And the potential for so much more, I would think.
That's right. I think in rough figures, our firm, Burke and Associates, is now 11 lawyers, 9 support staff. But I would calculate that probably 3 or maybe more equivalent full-time people are working almost exclusively for us in Calcutta.
Yeah.
So they've become an intrinsic part of our operation, and we learn from them and they learn from us. It's been a very mutually beneficial relationship.
Fantastic. So all up, what's your conclusion?
All up, I think I've been very lucky to have been given that advice by the legal management consultant many years ago. I'm very happy with our relationship with SBA, and I have the confidence also that because of that relationship, we've had to be a bit more structured in our own thinking, a bit more structured in the way we do things, and that we've become better lawyers, better operators as a consequence. So all over, a great experience.
Thank you, Tony. Thanks for sharing the Burke and Associates experience with us today.